this information at the higher levels of how um, the heligarchy works, that's always been available to people in some form.
Yes, it has, and that's one of the key aspects of my Irish origins work, which deals very strongly in the destruction of the Druids and the taking over of not just the Druids as we know them, meaning
Mhm.
located in England and Ireland. I mean the Druidic colleges throughout the world, Scythian, Gaelic, and megalithic Irish colleges throughout the world, the Irish, the Aria. Yes, and it took them approximately 1,000 years or more to not only um, colonize those countries. There was waves of that. When an average person who studied history looks at the history books and sees, oh yeah, I see, you had the Romans, you had Augustus and Julius Caesar coming in at 34 AD. Oh look, then comes the Normans, then or the Anglo-Saxons. You see, all these various waves are often taken as individual autonomous waves of colonization. Oh look, the Vikings. As a matter of fact, the prime datum there is that the Catholic Church, the Vatican, was behind every single one of those invasions. The Vikings who came over were mostly post-Christian Vikings. The Normans were directly involved with the Vatican, so much so that some of their dukes became the popes. And then you have the
Right.
Romans. The Romans was, I believe, a mercenary action. The Romans didn't come to England and use mercenaries. The Romans were mercenaries. They came to help with the takeover of Britain, and that's why they attacked the Druids. As a matter of fact, if you read the historians of Rome, they had tremendous respect for the Druids. There's no reason why they autonomously would have come over to France and England and wiped out people that they deeply respected. If you read Roman history, they respected the Druids. The Druids were respected as far away as India, and they were deeply respected by the Greek elites and oligarchs as well as the Romans. But they had to come and wipe them out on the Isle of Anglesey because they were told to do that by the hidden cabals that are exposed in the Irish Origins book. History will tell you that, oh, they came and made use of lieutenants that they found amongst the Saxons of England, that they made use of henchmen, that they themselves had hired mercenaries. But they've never told us that, in fact, the opposite, that England and Ireland had already been colonized 1,000 or even as much as 1200 BC
Yeah.
by by the groups that the very annals of Ireland say came, the very groups, and one of the queens was an Egyptian queen by the name of Scota, which is not only where Scotland and Ireland get their ancient names, but is where Scottish Rite Freemasonry gets its name. You say Scottish Rite Freemasonry to people, they go think it's something to do with Scotland. Yeah, maybe, but that's not the Freemasons laugh. They have that insider smile because they actually know what Scota really means. It's Atenist. It's the queen of the Atenists, and her
I know
real
that as well. I know that knowing smile. It's pretty creepy.
Yeah, they
Uh,
use these terms and words. They use these terms and words. Just look at the degree ceremonies in Freemasonry and look at the names, the commanders of this, the knights of that, the knights of the Red Cross. The highest degrees in Swedish Freemasonry is known as the Knight Commander of the Red Cross. What is a Red Cross? Does anybody ever ask what that is and where it came from, you see, and why it's on the British and Ulster flags and all the rest of it? No, nobody gives a damn. They think it's unimportant. Well, that's why they're in the state they're in now. Why is the Red Cross on the Knights of Garter symbol or the St. George and St. Michael and all the rest of it? The Red Cross on the charity, the Red Cross, you see?
yeah. Well, the Dunblane shooting. Getting back to another example, the Dunblane shooter was refused a gun license several times, and I think it was Lord Robertson that was involved in him finally obtaining a gun license. That the shooter himself would procure children for European businessmen, and this scout leader shooter was a Mason himself. It seems they don't seem to care about their own, or perhaps Masons themselves are required to sacrifice others and themselves for the so-called great work. Are
That's right.
most of these shooters? My question is: are most of these shooters unwilling participants in murder, or is there an element of self-sacrifice involved?
No, I think the person who's under mind control is in a deeply traumatized state. I very much am not of the school where you blame these people in the same way we would blame a monster, somebody who's actually gone around and done obvious crimes. There is a very different dynamic. These people are deeply wounded. You know, I feel for them. I understand what they've gone through, the hell that they've gone through. There was actually a whistle. This has been actually whistle blown, and I'm actually specifically speaking about the trauma. There was
Yeah,
a seven. Do you remember? You're British, so you remember. Americans might remember the Frank Cannon series of detective stories that were televised in the 1970s.
yeah,
Right. It was a very interesting series, same along with Hawaii Five-0. In one of the brilliant, still trying to get it. I had it on videotape, but it's absolutely buggered now. But in the, this was the detective was called to a military base in which something strange was going on, and one of his old military friends had gone missing. A quite high-level military personage had gone missing, and when they find him, he'd basically gone insane. And Frank Cannon discovered that it was through various mind control, deep mind control. And some of the other people that had gone through this horrific experience in the show whistleblew it and described the kind of trauma that they were subjected to. And a particular episode of Hawaii Five-0 back in the 60s also whistleblew this specific of how they do it, how they fragment the mind. Of course, people should be more familiar with it now, with the revelations of Arizona Wilder, Kathy O'Brien, and so on, but that's much later. There's certain programs that already whistleblew this before. So I have great, tremendous sympathy. In fact, I've even encountered one of the first things that happened to me when I got to the United States and lived there was that, and this was just before the first Desert Storm, I'd walk to work or I'd take the bus. And this was about 2 to 3 years after Ronald Reagan had let all of the people who had mental diseases and illnesses out. He had passed laws that threw them all out of their care, and they were basically on the streets. And all of California,
happening in England now, I think it has been for a long time.
Right. Well, California was in an uproar about it, and these poor souls, you see, would have to just travel the bus from one end of the stops to the next all day long, or just schlep about in the streets. And I'd meet many of these people, and some of them were unbelievable individuals. They'd even come into the shops that I was working in at the time, and I'd meet them at bus stops, and I'd talk to them. And one of the reasons I liked them is because they actually knew a lot of stuff about the conspiracy, whereas the average people I was working with couldn't give a monkey's about it. So that was one level of interest. But then they'd also give me deeper feedback about their own experiences. And some of these people had gone through living hell and knew that they had been poisoned, knew they'd been experimented on in these various VA hospitals, the veteran hospitals, of which there are many. And I've studied those. They're all articulated to the Chicago Institute and the SRI and various other institutes. Would take too long to go into. But these poor people had been raked in there, given money, given a bed to sleep in, and various other sort of benefits, but had also been subjected to deep hypnosis and deep trauma. And I could see it in these men's eyes. And then when they were telling me what they were going through. And these were deeply spiritual and moral people who had been subjected to unbelievable, barrages of pharmaceutical, chemical, and other forms of mind control. So I've met people myself who've gone through this.
So you have some idea of just what they've been through from your experiences of meeting them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
The black nobility, as they have come to be known throughout the centuries. They're employing extraordinary amounts of time and money suppressing humanity. What they call us useless eaters. And from your research, it seems that long ago we were introduced to the idea that human beings themselves have the same power and potential to raise themselves to the same level of consciousness that the black nobility may possess. On your travels and research, have you discovered any methods, i.e. meditation, lucid dreaming, by which people can train their minds back to our original state?
There are innumerable ways, but I personally don't get into that because it gets too much more like you end up creating an A to Z manual, which I'm against. I'm against all forms of collectivism. So the answer is yes, but it's about each individual trying to find what works for them. I'm very against these packages because then again you're in another form of mind control. When you do what somebody else is writing or you do what somebody else has suggested and come to our little group and hold hands and hug the world, this is all nonsense. This is all just another version of collectivism. So in other words, what you're doing is you're replacing one kind of auto-hypnosis or one kind of mind control with another,
Right.
Well, one of the things that just jumped to mind is that in the talk I did on Conspiracy Con during this brief look at mind control, and it ties into why Big Brother is operating the way he is, and he thinks that he's on strong ground, is because one of the things that happened traumatically, it was both positive and negative, is the loss of kingship. When we actually lost the real tribal leader, sort of like Sigmund Freud's All-Father, the great patriarch,